Monica, why y'all dressed up?
Me?
You, yes, the one who's,
I- I'm
oh,
not. I'm not even on screen.
oh,
You can
where is
see me?
Monica? I
Hi.
can see you because I've got a view on where I can see you, but I'm not
Oh,
sure if other folks can see you. Okay, yes, you are now pinned. Yeah, people can see you.
oh,
If you
hi
can't see
everybody.
Monica, I would just click view and hit standard if you can't see the two of us, and that'll let you see.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, maybe we should stop sharing screen as well so I can say hello to everybody.
there she is.
Hello, everybody. We're so happy to have you here. Are we doing spotlights now? There we go. Hi, friends. Welcome to FCYO's Power to Win webinar. I am in a little bit of a celebratory mode. Christopher
Yeah,
June.
why are you in a celebratory mode, Monica?
Well, it's always a great day to have a little bit of champagne, but today is a day that we've been looking forward to at FCYO for 7 years at least. We really began this journey to develop the Power to Win 7 years ago. And we
Mhm.
started with our own experiments. And so it is so great to be here virtually with 90 other folks ready to toast people power, ready to toast our ability to create meaningful change in our communities. And eager to learn more about the Power to Win framework. So I am so happy to be here. I am so happy all y'all are here with us. And I hope that you all will help us celebrate the Power to Win. I would love to hear from folks in the chat. Let's keep the chat conversation going. For those of you that read the Power to Win, I would love to hear what you're celebrating about the Power to Win. June, what are you celebrating about the Power to Win? What parts of it are exciting for you?
Yeah, I mean, I came up in a period of movement that I think was really good at some of developing the social emotional skills of folks, developing like folks' political education, but actually wasn't that great at contending for power. And so, what I'm excited for is combining those things in organizing for power, transformative leadership development, and combining those with those long term skills. What are you celebrating, Monica?
I am celebrating that there's actually a tool out there that can be a guiding North Star for folks to look at if you're thinking about building power in your communities and you're trying to figure out where do I start or what do I need to improve. That we have an offering, and to be able to publicly share that is actually a big privilege. And so, yeah, just excited for the conversations that are about to happen. But
Yeah.
do you want to get us started with the rest of the day? And hopefully folks will keep celebrating the Power to Win in the chat and engaging with us throughout these next few hours.
Yes, I would love that. Angie, if you could pull up that second slide, I'll let folks know where we're going. So today is a little bit, it's an exciting day. It's also sort of like, it's the launch of the framework. It's also an appetizer for the series that is to come. And as an appetizer, it's sort of structured like an intro paragraph to one of those essays you'd write when you were in elementary school that were supposed to persuade people about things, where the intro says a couple things and then you expository it out in the next paragraphs. So we're going to do an appetizer of what's going to come in the next 3 sessions. So the opening is really going to be what helps ground us in some assessment. And while we might do multiple hour assessments in some of our cohorts, this is going to be a short one, 15, 20 minutes. We're going to hear from you all about where we're at. We're going to share a little bit about where we're at and how we got here. Now we're going to get to hear from folks who are actually putting the Power to Win practice, Power to Win framework into practice. So we'll get to hear from Phoebe and Kalia about what that looks like. You all will get a chance to talk in small groups about that. Then we'll come back and we'll do a little bit of forward looking, future casting about what's the movement we're actually trying to build that we think could win. And lastly, we'll close. So that's what we're going to get up to today. And just want to let folks know a few security and tech notes. So Angie, if you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we recommend, view-wise, turning on speaker view. You can see side-by-side sort of speaker and slides. We ask for security reasons, if you can be on camera, please be on camera. You may have been to previous FCYO public-facing events where we have been Zoomed bomb on multiple occasions, and so we just try and it's actually easy for us. And I imagine most of you have facilitated meetings where you've mostly seen names, and it just feels good to feel that feeling of community amongst people. So if you can be on camera, please be on camera. If you have a question, comment, etc., we ask you to just drop the word stack in the chat and we'll know, that you have something you want to offer. Can't guarantee that we will get to everyone, but we also have someone ready to answer questions in the chat. So if you have a particular question, feel free to drop it. Angie is going to be responsible for sort of unmuting folks. So if you are called off stack, when you go to click unmute, it's going to say you're not going to be able to do that. So we will just let you know, and Angie will unmute folks. Angie and Troy are going to be running tech today. If you have any questions, please DM Troy. And please change your name tag to your name, pronouns, and organization. And the meeting will be recorded. And I just wanted to also just give a quick little shout out to the folks who are holding down crucial roles like Troy and Angie, who may not have a speaking role today, but are glue holding all this shit together. So Candace, our comms manager, who's made all these slides beautiful, who's the one, if you've seen a beautiful Instagram thing, if you've seen an awesome write-up somewhere, that's on Candace. Angie, who's our program associate, who's going to be holding down tech with Troy, our ops associate, and Tachi Santos, our donor engagement manager, who, speaking of, besides just dropping all the beautiful prompts into the chat and making sure we keep this shit moving, Angie, if you can move to the next slide. Tachi is who you should reach out to. If you are in philanthropy and want to learn more about FCYO or our work, you can reach out to Tachi at fcyo.org. And if you want to talk about our capacity building or programming, please reach out to me, Christopher June, Christopher at fcyo.org. Thank you for that. And with that, the one last note, sorry. At the very end of this, Raphael will talk a little bit about future sessions, but I did just want to make note of, if you come to all 4 sessions, FCYO is going to send you some swag. And as you'll see on this call, whether it's the sweatshirt I have on, the beautiful mugs, the shirts that Angie has on and is modeling, or Candace, FCYO takes our swag pretty seriously. And so you can get hype about getting a hard copy of the framework and some great swag if you do make it out to all 4. I just want to pass them on over to Monica, who's going to talk a little bit about how we got to the framework, lessons, where it came from, before we dive into the framework itself.
Good afternoon, everybody. I think it's afternoon for all of us. And I just realized that I did not do a very good job of introing myself. I was so excited to celebrate. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Monica Cordova, she, her, hers. I am the executive director at FCYO, and I am coming to you from Albuquerque, New Mexico. And again, it's just an honor to have you all here. And I am eager to start this session with a little bit of history. And June, if you don't mind, I'm gonna take a little bit of time to tell this story because I think it's important. FCYO, for those of you that don't know us, we're a funding and capacity building intermediary that really supports the field of youth organizing in a way that helps them advance power building and organizing strategies that build social transformation, work towards social transformation. And we do that in partnership with funders. And so that's what makes us a pretty unique entity, is that as an organization and as an intermediary, we're in deep conversation and connection with folks on the ground, organizers on a regular basis. And we're also in deep conversation and connection with folks in philanthropy, often folks who really believe in the power of young people. And because we have both vantage points, it means we have an opportunity to both bring folks together in different ways and also have different types of conversations that allow us to craft meaningful strategies. And so a few years ago, I think if you've read the Power Boom Framework, you know we talk a lot about assessment and the difference between assessment and evaluation, and how we kind of consistently need to be assessing our work, our role, and what we're up to against our analysis of the current conditions and the vision for the world we want to live in. and we have to be clear about what we're working towards. And there was a moment for FCYL when we weren't like clear. We were like, who are we? Are we a funder? Are we a field capacity builder? And what we learned is we're both, and that is our special sauce. But what we could have, where we have room to improve is the ways in which we're working with organizations. And so we started 7 years ago to kind of really question and dig into what is our role in this work. And we did that with a level of rigor that I think most organizations like kind of, find hard to do. And for us, it was even harder to do because we were being challenged by folks in the field to actually use our powerful and more our power in more meaningful ways that actually advance power. And so it was hard conversations. I tell the story often where we were in a room of organizers who did a power map, and we're like, FCYL, you're here, we're here. You all can bring us together in a way that we can't call on each other to bring together. And I pushed back on folks. I really pushed back on folks. I was like, no, that's not our role. And for a lot of institutions, a lot of philanthropic institutions, the way we move is not the way that they should move. But for us, it was important to know that we had an opportunity to step into a moment. You saw the conditions, how we all see the conditions, to actually step into that in a different way and build partnership and collaboration in a way that is about co-conspiratorship. That's just not about being an ally, but about actually advancing transformative power building strategies. And so the Power to Win framework is something that we started to work on as we built out this work, right? And we would always reference it in the back of our heads, the Power to Win. And it was like a loose kind of framework in all of our heads in the organization, but nothing we had put on paper. And it became very clear we needed to put this on paper, right? We needed to be able to tell the story of how we got here as an institution, and also name the pieces of power building that are critical in this moment. And so it's an offering, and it's something that we really hope you all on this call share with others, because it's meant to be shared. It's meant to be discussed. It's meant to be grappled with. It's meant to like disagree with it, and continue to like build that conversation out, because it's in our ability to have these hard conversations, to be challenged, to challenge and think through our own strategies, that we're actually going to win. And so up here, you'll see on the slide deck, here are some of the steps that got us there, right? And we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but I just wanted you all to know, we didn't just, decide 6 months ago to write something. We put a lot of heart, a lot of intention, and had a lot of hard conversations before we arrived here. And so, just like happy to be in this moment, like overjoyed. And as we always say at FCYL, here to bring the joy of this moment and the rigor of the work ahead.
Yeah, one of these cohort on the left, Pipelines to Power, is one of the spaces where we really got to wrestle with the fact that if you ask 18 organizations what power means, you do get 18 different answers, which I imagine if we scaled out to 100 of us on this call, we might get close to 100 different answers. And so in order to actually take responsibility for our role, we needed to really wrestle with what does power mean? And that's where the Power to Win really comes from. So Andy, if you can go to the next slide. We wanted to first define what the Power to Win means, because as Monica said, like when I came on staff in July of 2021, we would talk about the Power to Win as basically her and I, other folks on staff, other folks in the field have a shared assessment, but there was nothing on paper that I was actually holding it to us. It was all like the stuff that we know from having been in the field, the stuff we know from these conversations. And we wanted something that could help move the field. And so the Power to Win, we define as building the power to determine social and economic conditions for our communities and transform society as a whole. We've seen a lot of strong organizations win local campaigns, win state level fights. And as we saw in the opening poll, 85% of us said things are getting worse. We're not yet at the scale where we can determine the conditions for society as a whole. which would help us make those conditions better. So the Power to Win really is about that. And the question that it asks is, how do we build a movement to do so? What role does youth organizing play in that? And so, we have a couple of programs going on right now, the Gen Power Labs and YoCare, which Tachi dropped some links to in the chat, which are really some of our articulation of the Power to Win in real time. And throughout the rest of the series, we'll get to see that in action. But first, I want to kick it to my comrade, Raphael Randall, who is in both of those cohorts, Pipelines to Power and the Youth Power Lab, as a organizing practitioner, to just share a little bit about what do you think the framework makes possible, Raphael?
Thanks, June. As somebody who came into the field of youth organizing as an executive director right before Michael Brown was murdered, I have a solid sense of what the Power to Win framework can make possible, not only for youth organizing, but movement more broadly. It was during that period, starting with the first wave of Black Lives Matter in 2014, up through the 2016 elections and closing out with the pandemic and the uprisings of 2020, that a number of us saw the need for strategic consolidation and standardization of organizing practice. Frankly, I was tired of losing, and I love my class and my people too much to continue muddling along, just hoping that things get better. And I wasn't alone in that frustration. And it was clear to me and other political workers during that time that something just simply had to give, right? So the lessons that we have been learning through that period, alongside the experimental spaces hosted by FCYO, have been synthesized and distilled in the Power to Win framework, right? So it's our best attempt to expedite the correct development of youth organizing and broader movement at a time when we desperately need to level up. The world is rapidly changing around us, and we must adapt to avoid future calamity. And this requires a formal coming together or consolidation around a shared long-term strategic and practical orientation. For this to succeed, a critical process of comprehensive transformation of both our organizations and ourselves must take place simultaneously. So to close out, I believe in the Power to Win framework and its ability to help us initiate such a process because it reminds us of the 4 key pillars which comprise the DNA of numerous successful liberatory movements globally. And the framework itself can guide our efforts to materialize these pillars in our daily work. And given what I've been through, what I've seen and experienced as a political worker, I believe that if we step into this process in a rigorous and authentic manner, we can set a precedent of how to build vibrant strategic movements here in the US. And I believe that we can win the world that we want as a result and win decisively. And I'll pass it back to Jim.
Yeah, thank you so much, Raphael. And just real quick to name the 4 pillars as we conceive of them in the Power to Win framework are long-term strategic orientation, transformative leadership development, organizing for power, and assessment and experimentation. And we think these 4, which we think are both independent and dependent on one another, can support a diverse youth organizing ecosystem with a shared orientation, building power and to building transformative change. And each of these pillars has core capacities. We're not going to dive into those today, but each of them has core capacities you can see in the framework about how to do this work. So long-term strategic orientation, for instance, contains vision. You need to be able to vision out the world, both politically and economically, that you're actually trying to fight for. Doing so allows us to actually fight for that world. So we don't see visioning as just a set of feelings, which matter and are important and I've done 100 times, but actually what's the society you're fighting for? Welcome to National Power Builder Radio, your #1 show for tackling powerful transformation. I'm your host, Christopher June Zazamia, coming to you live in front of a not quite studio audience. And today with me, I'm joined by 2 fantastic guests, Kalia Harris from Virginia Student Power Network and Phoebe Dolan of Maine Youth Power. As Raphael mentioned above, we hope the framework makes a new sort of movement possible, one where we could win. And I'm excited to hear from organizing practitioners putting that framework into practice now. Kalia and Phoebe are both part of the Level Up Lab, which is the second tier of the Gen Power Labs, which Tachi has dropped links to in the chat. In Level Up Lab, folks have been assessing their existing organizing practices, particularly base building and leadership development, which both came up in the sticky notes. They're using this assessment to develop a hypothesis about how they can sharpen that work through experimentation. And if you remember back to the pillars, assessment and experimentation is the fourth pillar of the framework. And these groups' particular experiments nest under pillar 2, organizing for power, and pillar 3, transformative leadership development. Maine Youth Power and Virginia Student Power Network are now transitioning from designing their experiments to conducting them. And so we're excited to have them here on the podcast in the midst of that pivot. As they speak, per Monica's invitation, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. So with that, maybe starting with Kalia and then moving over to Phoebe, can you tell us a little bit about who your organizations are? Who do you organize? Where do you organize?
Hey y'all, my name is Kalia Harris. I use she, her pronouns, and I am in so-called Virginia, where we have Wi-Fi issues. So if I start to sound like a robot, let me know. And I am the executive director of Virginia Student Power Network. We are a coalition of young people based out of Virginia, and we have folks all across the state that are organizing for power. And you want me to go into like who we are right now?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, a little bit more about what you're up to.
Cool. So most of the folks that we're organizing with attend or have attended a Virginia school or university at some point, or they're current students right now. And they are in the north of the state, they're in the south, the southwest, where we've been expanding over our the last 2 years of being in the Gen Power Labs. And so most of our folks are people who are interested in changing the material conditions in Virginia. A lot of them are poor, working class, young people, Black people, brown people, queer folks, and we're really the ones that are affected by the issues that we're organizing around. And so we really envision a world where we don't have police and we don't have prisons, and our folks have decision-making power within their institutions, whether that's their schools or their government. And so we are building mass power among young people to achieve that reality.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kalia. And Phoebe, what are you all up to up there in Maine?
Hi, everyone. My name is Phoebe Dolan. I use she, her pronouns. I am calling in from Maine. Obviously, I'm the co-director of Maine Youth Power. Just a quick shout out, anybody who's from Maine in this crowd. I've got one plant, but if anyone else is, drop it in the chat. It's always great to find other Mainers. Maine Youth Power is a youth-led youth movement of rural young Mainers. We are building power to win human dignity, equity, access, and a livable future. And we primarily organize in Maine's 2nd congressional district, which is the entire state. That's not Portland. Our base is rural youth. We are extremely spread out. Our movement launched in 2021 with myself and 6 other folks. And we have grown significantly since then through almost entirely relational organizing. Our base works in elections, helping to turn out the youth vote in rural Maine, along with working in the legislative session to hold those same politicians accountable to what laws they're passing that actually stand for what youth need. We also have local campaigns we run currently surrounding trans and queer student rights in high schools and public high schools in Maine, and we're going to be expanding those local campaigns to more spots. And right now in our movement, we're just getting ready to launch a pretty significant base building program that's going to fuel our FCYO Level Up Lab practice shift, which I'll get to in a second. And that's Maine Youth Power.
Yeah, thank you so much, Phoebe. I know there's at least one other person who spends at least half her time in Maine on this call who's not Shukri, who might be your plant. So there's at least 3 of y'all. Phoebe, starting with you, and you teased it for us a little bit, but Can you share a little bit about what the organizing practice you're trying to shift is in the Level Up Lab? And what do you think that shift will make possible that isn't possible for y'all now? And Angie, if you could just unmute Phoebe.
Thank you. Great question, June. Basically, we have taken on part of the Power to Win framework we were presented with in Level Up Lab was choosing between a few different areas of our work that we could make better and make more powerful in general. We chose to shift our practice from not having a political education program to having one. We are launching a program we're calling the Movement Building School this fall, and it's going to run for 8 months. Our plan is to be scaling up and skilling up about 25 young Mainers between the ages of 17 and 22, 21, 22, to work with us in getting a really clear understanding of the conditions that we're working under and teaching them strong political ed. So therefore they can come into our movement and then come back out the other side, ready to be our movement, be our staff, and bulk us up for a pretty epic 2024 election in Maine. This practice shift is going to change everything for our organization. The opportunity to work with everyone at FCYO has absolutely supercharged our ability to build the Movement Building School, and we're excited to see what that practice shift makes possible.
Yeah, and can you say a little bit, just as someone who knows a little bit behind the curtain, can you say a little bit about the timing? Like, you know, you're training these folks to get them ready for the election cycle. Why?
Yeah, so we basically need, we're scaling up people to get them ready for the 2024 election cycle. Maine has a Senate seat that will be up for grabs in the 2024 election, along with just the presidential race. Rural Maine really needs relational voter turnout. We ran an experimental program in 2022 that proved to us that it was a smaller modeled program, but we learned a lot, and we got a lot of people voting who just had not voted before. And so we're really excited to be building this, basically a block of youth voters that will have to be reckoned with in Maine. This is like one step closer to heightening our capacity to do that.
Yeah. And one of the things that's been exciting, we struggle with folks over their hypotheses and their shifts, has been for you all, like, to think about how you can train those folks to be skilled in the political education and also the hard organizing skills, right?
Totally.
That as folks go out into the field, they're becoming part of a base for Maine Youth Power to be on the election, actually fight, as you said, in the Senate. Kalia, how about you? What's a practice shift that you're looking to make in these next 18 months? What do you think it'll make possible?
So we are essentially building a new container within our organization. Right now, we have programming that is for emerging and newer organizers, and we have like a frequent space for our base to connect with each other. Since we're a statewide network, most of our gatherings are virtual, the occasional in person. But when we're doing our assessment, both in the OWL Lab and with Level Up, we realized we don't have a container where we're developing the leadership and the organizing skills of our base, like the people that are coming out time and time again, our core organizers. And we also recognized who those people were. We were just kind of referring to the group as like this ambiguous, our members, but getting really specific that the majority of the folks within VSPN are leaders of a youth organization or leaders of a student organization on their campus. And we need a place to continue to develop their skills and grow with them. And so our program is actually very similar to Maine Youth Power's program. We're creating a cohort that will develop the skills of organizers that are in leadership of organizations within our network. So we currently have things that build up individual organizers' skills. Most of our folks that do our programs right now are a part of an organization, but we have never intentionally looked to build up the skills of the leadership of organizations within the network. And so we're really looking to, with our program that will run this fall, really test out with 5 organizations within our networks what it would look like and be like to build up the skills of 2 leaders per org and really help them work through some goals throughout the course of the cohort so that their organizations are coming out stronger in the end. And what we realize is that that's going to make our network a lot stronger as well, because then they're also connecting and strategizing with each other, not just as an individual, but as an organization. And so that'll be a really big shift for us. Right now, we're very much in fellowship mode with our newer organizers. And so this will test us to dig a little bit deeper into skills and curriculum and practicing alongside our folks.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Kalia. And I'm going to pop it right back to you, Kalia, in 1 second. But just want to say that one of the things we experience a lot in movement is pretty amorphous. You come in as a member, and if people like you, you eventually become staff. In between, you may or may not be trained. And so one of the things LevElf Lab is attempting to course correct in which both of these experiments demonstrate is the transformative leadership development capacities and the organizing for power skills that are necessary to move people up a leadership ladder. So what I love about both these experiments is it's not just enough for someone to get really sharpened in political theory. It's not just enough for someone to get really sharpened in building a power analysis or having really great social emotional regulation and skill for struggle, right? It's not till you test those skills out in the field that those skills are actually measurable. And both these hypotheses really wrestle with that interplay between leadership development and organizing that is so necessary to level folks up. So really excited by both of those shifts. I'm just gonna ask a couple more questions. Kalia, what's like something for folks who don't know, right, what the cohort experience is like? Like what's one experience in the cohort that's prepared you for helping build the power to win?
Well, June, I did too, because that's how I am. But the first one, of course, would be principled struggle. And that's something y'all really introduced to us in New Mexico in October of last year. And I think a lot of us went home to our orgs with that and we're like, let's engage in some principled struggle, right? But the concept that we actually do need to be in space to disagree, to grow, and from that sharpen our understandings of each other and also where we're headed, and being clear, right, about those things in communication with each other. I think just the whole concept of how we communicate with each other as organizers, and especially principled struggle, has really resonated not only with me, but our organization. And I could not leave this part out of answering. So I have to say that assessment has been an experience for me and for my organization that has transformed us. We did assessment, we did quick debriefs, we talked about what was working and what wasn't, but we weren't doing it from a long-term strategic orientation, and the way that we're not only saying how did this go and did it go well, but is it actually pushing us along to where we want to be? And that's a whole different orientation to have to assessment. And y'all always say, we say these words in the FCYO space of joy and rigor, but that's so such a vibe that I really appreciate, because it's helped me to be open to the process of change. When you're doing an experiment, you have to be willing to fail or for things to go wrong, to F around and find out, as we say in one of my local collectives. And so being able to bring that into this organizational space, right? We're not a small collective now. We are an organization that's really growing and building out operations and processes. And that can feel really serious as young people, right? But I think also being in space with others who are grappling with that has been immensely transformative for us and for me.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kalia. And also just, the Kalia referenced the fuck around, find out. Well, Kalia said F, but Kalia referenced that quote and talking about also to experiment, right? And so Andrew's wearing a shirt that says movement scientist, which we all try and embody. This idea of we're going to have to fail if we're going to try and win bigger than we've ever won before. And with that, Phoebe, I'm going to kick it to you to just sort of answer the last two questions total, right? So, yeah, what's an experience within the cohort that has helped prepare you to build the Power Win, and what does being a movement scientist mean for you?
Totally. So much at FCYO dovetailed exactly when I joined in the first level of the Gen Power Labs in 2021 that gave words to what I'd always known and felt. And one of those that I've been realizing more recently is the idea of the long-term strategic agenda and the idea of a strategic partner or ally. My entire life, I've known in Maine that we need a rigorous, badass movement that wins. And rural Maine does not currently have that movement. And I knew that was really important, and Maine Youth Power, all of us collectively decided that was something we wanted to bring here and to build the power to win. And with FCYO, the language we were given around assessing and identifying organizations in our movement ecosystem that we can bring with us, that we can figure out ways and common language to connect with other people who are not in Gen Power Labs and help us all become better organizers and actually collectively build the power to win. Finally, I have the words to say that, and it relieves me of the huge mound of stress and anxiety around feeling like only Maine Youth Power can do this work alone because others are not there with us. And I've found myself and Shikri and others in our org have found ourselves getting curious and excited to start having power to win framework conversations with people, getting really serious around what does it mean to have a youth agenda in Maine where we actually are building steps to win something. And that's been so exciting. And I think that part of this cohort has opened my mind to the language to use and the way to express what I know, and actually to build something to win. So that's been huge. It's a main part of the org experience for me. And as to the second question, being a movement scientist means that we're allowed to fail, right? Scientists don't have to create hypotheses and don't have to have them work. It's a benefit to know it didn't work, and it's a benefit to have it have worked. And it's exciting to be able to fail and succeed in the community with everybody else. I think that's been the vulnerability element's been huge for us.
Yeah. Thank you both so much. We're going to get a chance. I see folks have some questions in the chat, Alex. We're going to get a chance to just talk a little bit about what we just heard from Phoebe and Kalia. And I just want to give a huge shout out and thanks to the two of you for the work that you do. And if folks can just show some love for these folks, emoji reactions or chat reactions, just for the incredible work and sharing that these folks did. We're going to share. So Alex had asked for the programs you're experimenting with, how are you relating to resourcing and stipending members and leaders, which we know is not a uncommon question, particularly in youth organizing. So I'm going to pass it to, there's Alex. Hi, Alex, we're about to answer your question. Kalia, if you could just say, how you are relating to that.
Yeah, this is a question that has come up a lot at the convenings, and something I've been asking folks about how they do it too. And so what I will say is that part of our hypothesis and experiment, this is an area we're still kind of figuring out for ourselves, and figuring out like, what does it look like to move from just investing in our individual members or base into also like resourcing the organizations that are going to be a part of this experiment with us. And so some of the different things we're looking at, in addition to thinking through stipending, but that's one avenue. We want to like test out some other ones too. We're thinking about like, what does it look like to share different resources with organizations that can allow them to increase their capacity to reach their goals. And we really do want to think about like, what are the things that are going to increase that base to actually help us build the power to win. Our little budget is not going to be able to pay each and every person the money that we need to pay them. But what we can do is be really, really strategic about making sure that our resources are being felt in a way that gets to the most people. And so, of course, we're going to invest in the people that are a part of our programs, but we're also looking to be creative about investing into the organizations that make up our ecosystem and our network.
Thank you so much, Kalia. If you were thinking, oh shit, I want to hear from more organizers about what they are fighting for, I have great news for you. That is exactly what we are about to do. And so we're going to get a chance to hear from Vidi and Fahad, who are both part of the Praxis for Power cohort, which is the third tier of the Gen Power Labs. Vidi and some other folks from P4P were recently featured in Convergence Magazine, an article called Youth Organizers Building Alliances to Win, which really got into. I keep getting texts that a quote of Vidi's about, yeah, you know, we end up in struggle, and because of our underdevelopments, people are just like, fuck you, but we can't be doing that all the time in movement. So maybe we'll get to hear Vidi talk about struggle at some point. But we're excited to talk about, with these folks who've been in movement for a bit, what we're trying to build. So if you could welcome Fahad and Vidi, and we're going to come back to National Power Building Radio. And so Vidi and Fahad, starting with Fahad and then kicking it on over to Vidi. Same question that started off with Kalia and Phoebe. Can you just say a little bit about who you are, what's the work that your organization does, and just also help ground us? Could you say a little bit about like how long you've been in the youth organizing? So Fahad and then Vidi.
Cool. Peace, folks. Fahad, any pronouns are good, and I am the executive director of DRUM, Daisy's Rising Up and Moving. We organize working class South Asian and Indo-Caribbean people in New York City and increasingly in New York State. We're a multi-issue organization, immigrant rights, racial justice, educational justice, worker rights, housing, gender, and then global justice. And I've been with DRUM for 23 years, the last 12 years on staff, last 8 years as ED. And I came into this work because I grew up in a undocumented working class family, had a cousin that was entrapped and went to prison for 7 years in the war on drugs, a brother that was put into deportation proceedings because of encounters with the police, and then facing just like lots of racial violence going to high school in Oklahoma. And so that's kind of what pulled me into this work and keeps me engaged.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Fahad, for sharing and for the work that DRUM does. I'll drop a link at some point to just this really incredible zine that DRUM put together, chronicling their work, particularly after 9/11 in New York City. And I'm going to pass it to Vidi from Poder in Action.
Hey everyone, Vidi Hernandez, Poder in Action, and AZ Poder. And let me see. At the org, we say that our fight is for long, healthy, and joyful lives. We organize in zip codes where we are expected to live up to 10 years less than just 10 miles north of us. But not only are we living less, so our quality of life is also less. And in that, right, like we know that is due to the history of violence, capitalist, racist, patriarchal policies that have been put in place and what we call, state violence. And so a lot of our work is also very seen against the Polimigra, the intersection of the police and the migra, as the most like visual form of state violence. But we fight and expose that and fight on that front very loudly, because all of the other fights of state violence, like if you can't see that, like it's really hard for us to really believe that someone who's doing education work or food justice work can see the food deserts if as violence, if they can't see policing, right? That is such a visual So both of those pieces, I've been with this organization since 2013, started as a volunteer, became a director at the end of 16. I was 24, didn't know what leading an organization was. But like Fahad shared, like I joined because of my own personal experience, as so many of us. I was 17, realized I wasn't documented. Then SB 1070 started getting debated, and we were able to remove a lot of these extremely violent codes in SB 1070 that we actually just saw pass in Florida, such as like if you're in a car or you're in a house, you're going to be charged with felony charges as harboring or transporting undocumented folks. And so that was a fight in 2010. So 13 years ago in Arizona, that was the fight. And we're seeing that continuously still be part of the fight. So that's why I joined, and I started just learn, like, how do we fight back? How do I keep my family safe? And now have, lead into it. That led me to this work in this organizing. But yeah, so it's never been just like youth organizing. It was just organizing. It was just doing the work. Like I didn't come into a youth org. I didn't come into youth. It was just young people fighting in Arizona.
Yeah, both your organizations fighting at the intersection of sort of like immigration and state violence, and really putting forward, what base building can do. And also both having gotten to know you all, sort of thinking about this relationship between your local organizational work and state level fights and bigger fights. And so, right, the framework really pushes for a movement that can shape the economic and social conditions for society as a whole. So I think you all have really demonstrated like what can really strong fight back look like, whether that's been Drum fighting for sort of like excluded worker funds, or Poder fighting against SB 1070. And we want to fight for a movement, right? That can be not just fighting against, but fighting forward for our vision. Starting with you, Fahad, can you say a little bit about the kind of movement you want to be a part of building? Knowing no one organization can do that, but can serve its role in it. What's the sort of movement you want to build? What kind of skills does it have? What would it make possible for your members that isn't possible now?
Yeah. I think I want to reference back to something that Raphael said in their introduction, which is talking about the enormity of violence and destruction that the system perpetrates, not only on our communities here, but in also exponential levels across the world. And for us at Drum, from its inception, a very strong component of our work is understanding the obligations upon us as a result of our location inside the belly of the empire, the belly of the beast. That it is our obligation to figure out how do we stop the functioning of this machine, and to figure out the creation of a new system and of a new world. And so to us, if that's the vision, is to bring an end to this death machine and to put in something that is life-affirming and focused on the building and development of human beings individually and collectively, then to us, movement building becomes about like sort of the coherence of our forces, the coherence of our understanding to be able to get to that vision. And it's been a major reason that historically, like we've always invested in relationship building with other organizations, not just in our city, not just in like the sectors, issue sectors that we work in, but like across the country and internationally. Because we need to learn from each other, we need to be in relationship with each other, and if possible, like start building some synergy and synchronicity with each other. But to be able to do that, to be able to carry out like this organizing work like requires like several different types of like capacities. There's kind of like the ideological, like what we think, and that is like sort of like what was earlier the folks from Maine were talking about, like building a political education program. There's organizing skills, how we're knocking on doors, how we're phone banking, facilitating, running meetings, pulling together actions. I think these are the two that like often kind of do get talked about in our movements. But there's like sort of three other things that we have been increasingly honing in on that don't get talked about so much. One is personal practice, which is just like how people personally show up. Being disciplined, being punctual, like sort of communicating effectively, things like that. A fourth one is emotional skills, that for us to be able to engage in a lot of these struggles, we actually need to be able to have clarity about when am I responding to things that are actually happening versus I'm responding to like some of my past traumas or past things that are coming up, or even just like what happened with my kids in the morning. Like if they were delayed for like breakfast, like is that like sort of like impacting how I'm showing up to this panel and being like agitated? And then lastly is like connectivity, that we saw initially the organization used to focus a lot on ideological, and the kind of like what we were seeing was the members that we had were like the people that were like really socially isolated but like super smart. They were super isolated, so like they really couldn't engage and like move other people. And so I think we've started like figuring out that like there's all of these different kind of capacities that we need, and nobody is going to have like all of them, but we also need people that are like connected to each other, well connected within the community. In the same way that we are connected within the movement, we need like our communities and our members to be connected within the community, because we need to be able to move them. It's not enough for us to be able to organize our members. And then especially now, as the right wing is growing across the country, we're actually seeing inroads of the right wing into our own community. And we can no longer afford to just organize our members. We actually need to organize both our members and for our members to be able to organize the community, engage the community, agitate the community. And like, as we do this, like we need to be able to do this with like multiple other organizations in the city, across the country, for us to like really be able to start moving in the direction that builds power to be able to achieve the vision that I highlighted earlier.
Yeah, thank you so much, Fahad. Vidi, I'm gonna ask you to, in particular, touch on what you're trying to build. And I think Fahad said a little bit about like what cross-organization building, how important that is. And so if you could also just touch on like, what are some of the capacities we actually need to be in relationship with other power building organizations?
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that, Fahad. I think there was also a question or a few questions that have come up around like the resourcing and some of that, right? And I think about what you're sharing with also like there is a point like we need a movement so big, right? We're talking about the millions and developing the outreach to be able to reach a lot of people, and we're not going to be able to pay thousands of people. We're not going to be able to pay millions of people, right? And so like that's something that just came up that I wanted to reiterate. So it's like when we're talking about what we're building, we're not building just a core group of leaders that are going to do all. And I think that's what's been happening in our movement, that then we're burned out because we're not growing our capacity, because we ourselves are limited in our abilities, or I just think about so many gaps in my own development coming into this movement that was just like, just go. And it was sink or swim. And I was able to swim. I don't even know how to swim. I was doggy paddle my way out, and that just can't sustain us. And I think that's part of the reality that we're facing. And so when I think about the movement that we're trying to build, I'm talking about a movement that can win, but not just win these campaigns that feel like wins, but really win those shifts. And like for us, like, can we live longer? Like, it's just a shitty reality to think about. My little brother was just born 3 years ago, and I'm like, dang, him being born in our community, he's just gonna live less. I'm gonna live less. Like that reality of like, what is really a win, right? And having a movement that can build strong people, strong organizers, that includes everything that Bahad shared, but also people that can take the fights on every front, right? We need like the beast we're up against. What we're up against has like multifaceted, multi-heads, like they have a solid foundation and are spread out. Like we need to be able to fight at every front, from legal to on the ground, on the narrative, like you name it. Like we need people ready to lead with discipline, with the practice, with the analysis at all of those fronts. We need a movement that can reflect and has, the ability to question each other, to engage in principle struggle, and I think to share the discipline. Like one of the biggest gaps as I was reflecting with the cohort around my own development was reflection, and that rigor to assess was not something that was instilled in us, right? Part of like sink or swim. And I think about the history of like the lessons that we haven't applied, the things that we haven't continued to do, the things just we're not assessing and having sober assessments. Like we move by what we feel now, we move by what's moving now with social media, right? Like there's these major shifts that people are pushing for, but they're not grounded in what's necessary in this moment, on what actually needs to happen, on the power we're trying to build. And I also, so in that, like the ability to be able to struggle with each other, to be able to question each other, to, so many times in our local movement, like a question to someone's strategy became an attack. And it was like, no, that was not an attack. It was like, it was a question so that we can seek clarity. And, sometimes that feeling, going back to the emotional intelligence of attack, might come from our own, concerns and our own, like, damn, I don't have the answer, so now I feel like it's an attack, when it really should be seen as, oh, I don't have the answers, maybe this isn't the right thing, let's talk about it. So, right, the ability to do that, our ability to question each other, the discipline to do that, and in that, creating the skills to co-govern, right? And so we're saying that we want to have the ability to govern for ourselves, but governance is not just about the decisions that are going to be made different, right? If we continue to make the decisions in the same way that they've been made by the few, in the same processes, then we're not actually shifting. So when we think about co-governance at Poder, we think about that the decisions are going to be different when how you make the decisions is different. The process is different. Who's part of a decision making is different. Then through that, the decision ends up being different, right? And like, so how do we govern? How do we engage? How do we assess? So all of those pieces for me just really came up. And then in building a base and strategic alliances, again, we need everyone. Poder has a very specific base, specific members that we're trying to reach, that we're trying to talk to. And we need everyone else. And so in that, right, like organizations, we have limits, we have, we have limits in our analysis. When we don't have certain experiences, we have limit in our capacity. So really expanding that, like we need other alliances, but we also need to have built up our skill set to be in alliances together. There's been a handful of times, like, an organization, a union, a students group, a parents group have said problematic things in a space. And a lot of times our movement's like, done with them, like they are problematic. And I think about that, and I think about our members, like we, one of our, we have a youth program, but we also have a family program that is Spanish speaking, mostly undocumented families with a very specific history, lived experience. And we'll say things that are not in alignment with our abolitionist movement, with our org even in values. And we can't just say, oh, you're not there, you're not woken up, you're out, right? Like these are Spanish speakers. This is my tias, this is my mama, this is a lot of my neighbors who are not getting our narrative, right? Spanish media is not giving them our narrative. The Spanish media is very right. they're being contested by our Spanish speakers and immigrants are being contested by the right, while our movement isn't really investing in Spanish narrative, in Spanish media, in, you know, all of that. So for us, our role is not to just say like, oh, well, you're out because you don't get it. You don't get white supremacy. You don't get capitalism. Oh, they absolutely get it. They live it. But it's just that hasn't been yet contextualized for the masses in our, like, when I think about our Spanish speaking program. And so that is our work, right? Our work is to be a commitment to not discard our community, to engage in that battle of ideas with them, to move them in the way that we need to. And that is not easy and that is hard. And at times organizations, right, because our members have said things that are not in alignment, are like, fuck you all. And we're like, no, our work is to now be accountable to that and we're doing that work. Like, here's how we're doing it. But we're not going to discard this community because we need them. Like we need those Spanish speaking families who in Arizona are a lot. We need them. So yeah,
Yeah, when we have a orientation towards a politic that means we have to build towards millions, it means that we can't be as quick to dispose of people for what are just reactions to the world we live in, as you said, Vidi, right? Like in both of your stories, you talked about how the right is contesting for your communities. So some of their narratives are going to seep into our people, right? We live in a dominant society that is not aligned with our values. That means the majority of people right now are not going to reflect our values. And it's not just telling folks what we think is correct that is going to win folks over. It's doing the work that you all have flagged of like, we have to change people's actual conditions. And to what Raphael put in the chat, right? We have to give people work that changes how they function and how they relate to the world and to each other. And so I look forward to building that movement, Vidi, that can extend the length of your brother's life and your community's life, and Fahad, your folks. I just want to ask one more question before we take questions from the audience. Just, you know, how do you see the work that's happening now, sort of in the Gen Power Labs, Power to Win? How's that going to help us build that sort of movement? How might it already actually be shaping some of your work? And start with Fahad and then move over to Vidi.
All right. I think so. Part of it is because of like the kind of political grounding and orientation that Drum comes from. I think we always had a sense around like sort of what it is that we need to do to. We always had a sense that we need to build power in a way that's actually allows us to shape the social and economic and the world conditions. But because our movement ecosystem is pretty weak and the left is fragmented in the US, by and large, we didn't find too many other organizations that were grappling with the same questions. Oftentimes they were just like, how do we make our organization look better? How do we pass this one bill, which will then also allow our organization to look better? And I think the framework, I think, is definitely been good around like sort of like honing in on sort of like what are the standards that we're using to measure our work, and that being specifically like thinking about power and like sort of like defining power in a little bit more meaningful way, and then actually creating an infrastructure that like allows other organizations to go through the process to internalize these ideas, and most importantly to be able to support each other. Because I think like that's been one of the main challenges is, as Christopher June said earlier, like no organization can do it alone. But even if an organization is trying, like it needs like other organizations like also be able to reflect with, to struggle with, and like figure things out. And like the end result of all of this that we are both seeing now and we are looking forward to continue to see is just like a qualitative leveling up on our mass organizing work. around our base building. So to like make it more specific, we are shifting from a model of just organizing our members to organizing our members and our members organizing the community, because of like the need that we see, and because of like we've identified that's sort of like one measure of power. Many people in our communities can we influence. We are leveling up on our leadership development. We've always had like a vague kind of like orally conveyed sort of like sense of like what are the leadership qualities that we're like trying to build, but like now we're putting them into like a leadership scale and a ladder. Like here's a particular skills and capacities we want people to develop, and like then that'll mean like, okay, what are the ways that we develop those out? And then like thinking about campaigns, thinking about fights that allow us to both do this kind of like not just to be able to pass the bill or like pass a change in legislation, but like actually allows us to like build up our people, engage our communities, not just our members, but like the communities at large, and possibly even like fights that create new possibilities, open doors for new possibilities because of either how people are transformed or because of how our ways of thinking of what's possible is transformed.
Thank you, Fahad. And Vidi?
June, can you restate the question? Sorry.
Oh yeah. Like, how do you see, you named the movement you want to build, right? One that's engaging millions, one that's organizations are able to build across organizational difference in a meaningful way to build strategic alliances. How do you see the work that you're doing in P4P, Power to Win, framework helping contribute to building that sort of movement? And how might it be shaping Poder's work already? Oh, Angie, can you unmute Vidi?
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think we talked a little bit about this in the breakout, right? I think that this framework isn't just a youth organizing framework. I think it is an organizing framework, and that it is an organizational framework, and that I think a lot of our orgs are looking at this as an organizational shift, not just as a programmatic shift. And that I think feels really critical and really powerful. And in that, right, when I think about what is the role of this space, the learning, the reflection, and the vulnerability that we've been able to engage together through these spaces is something that for Poder allowed us to be honest, right, to be vulnerable, to not feel like we have to front. Especially, in funding spaces and with other orgs, like there's a lot of fronting around like, yeah, this is great, we're doing so great, all of our campaigns, blah, blah, blah. And really just to be honest and cry it out at times and say, yeah, like things are happening, some campaigns are being won, and y'all, like our people are still in the situation that, my mom is still as deportable as she was 13 years ago when I started this fight. Like she can still be deported, driving my brothers to school. Like all of these conditions are still real, and like being able to just not front and be vulnerable and say, how do we engage in this? The support that we receive from each other, right? Like there is everyone in these spaces is trying to win. And therefore we're asking each other these like tough questions about our programming, about our programs, around our effectiveness. That has been a huge piece. And then these experiments for us has, like, even just before the framework was done, right? But in alignment with the framework, we're like, we need to start making shifts. And so things from our base development program, like, we were finding that, we were not growing our base in the same way and not seeking every opportunity. So for example, last year, we went knocked doors, and this time, one of the shifts we made was that we were asking people to join the base at the door. Before, we were asking them to take action. Sometimes when voting, we were asking them to vote, right? So all of those things, we're doing surveys, all of those are great. And now this time we were also saying, and this is who we are, and this is why you should be part of us. And this is how we're aligned. And in that, we created like Poder household. So we people who said yes, we were able to put like a sticker on their window, and put, give them a way to recognize that they're part of the Poder base. So when we went back, or as we call them, voters and non-voters, we're saying, hey, thank you for being part of the Poder base. Thank you for being part of the Poder household. Like, this is what's happening. This is what we need. This is where we're at. And that was a shift around like, how are we reaching the constituency and starting to bring them in? So that was a gap we had. We had lists and lists and lists of thousands of people, but they weren't actually being activated in a way that is meaningful to the fights that we're trying to build. Our leadership development, right? We've had to rethink through what are the skills, right? I think there was someone asking like, but what are the skills? What do people like? Some of those skills are very clear around how are we recruiting? Like, how are you making an ask? But then other ones are like, how are you having hard conversations? Like, we have, an avoidance to hard conversations. And so when you're at the door and someone says no, we're like, okay, bye, right? And sometimes we do need to say bye. But like, how do you assess? Like, how do you, some of these critical skills to make clear assessments? Do you walk away from this person, or no, you actually engage with this person because they're not agreeing, but it's not that they're not agreeing with you. They're just, sharing their experience in their reality. So, those are harder skills, right? Like, so from critical assessment to making assessments in a space, to having hard conversations, to pushing back after a no, to coming back. So both some of those skills, like what does that look like in our ladder of engagement? Last year, for the first year in our organizational history, we had developed some candidates that were ready to run for office. In our C4, decided we were going to endorse for the first time. And so these were 3 really solid members from our youth program, for our base program, and from our Family Justice Collective. They ran boldly, they ran unapologetically, they ran with our narrative, like they were great, they ran and they won. So then on our, all of these skills to win, so they won. And now they're in the governance. So this is the first 6 months of governance. And we have found some gaps, right? And we meet weekly with them. We talk about what does it look like to actually be in the state where so much violence was created to them as individuals. And now they're navigating these huge decisions that are impacting school board members, over 33,000 students, and our state senator, Arizona. And, we have found other gaps in terms of like, what are the skills that we need to actually govern? And now we're thinking about like, what is our role in engaging some of these things into our leadership development that we didn't know we needed until now. So I think just that constant assessment, the constant like willingness to shift, to say we didn't get it fully right, to say actually we got it wrong. So what does that look like? And this space has played the biggest role in being able to do that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shaviti. I'm going to briefly just sort of touch on a little bit of how this cohort kind of kicks my ass, and like the back and forth that happens between the cohort and FCYO to like keep sharpening the work of Praxis for Power to get to Ron's question. So we're trying something out, right? Like Phoebe and Kalia both talked about being movement scientists. We're trying out this process of what it means to cohere folks around the Power to Win framework. And that means being really open to feedback. And so I'm going to share something that we're actually still in work on, but that comes from the cohort really pushing for us to start to think about, okay, you talk a lot about leadership ladders. We've all assessed our leadership ladders. What is the type of leadership ladder that we're actually trying to build? And so I share this not because it's a finished product. It's actually in the midst of being created. And visually, it's not up to snuff because it's not there yet. But I want to share and demonstrate like how we think about human development in the Praxis for Power cohort to try and set a standard of what leadership development looks like. Angie, can you turn I'm going to share something, Angie, a link for you in the chat in Signal. If you can just screen share this real quick rather than turn on participant screen share. So one of the things that happened in the cohort is we had this idea, right, of we want to be able to turn members into member leaders into organizers. But we needed to talk about in each of the 8 organizations in Praxis for Power, what are the actual skills that people need to develop to make that happen? What are the activities that people need to be engaged in? And in the framework, we identify transformative leadership development as having 3 major pillars. Those are the political, social emotional, and strategic capacities. And I am going to just share one document. Angie, here you go. I'm putting it into our Slack. I had accidentally shared Angie a whole folder. And this will give a demonstration of what we talk about when we mean moving people with more clearly defined roles from member to actually trained and skilled organizer, which doesn't necessarily mean them being a staff organizer. And so we developed this little pie chart. Again, it's not pretty, and it's also nowhere near finalized. But these are the sort of things that come from Vahad, VD, the folks in C4D, other organizations, that in your first year, you should be engaging in street outreach. So I know for me, this cut against a lot of how I had actually come up, which was you spend a lot of time in political education. You don't spend a ton of time actually out on the doors. So within your first year, you need these organizing skills with phone banking. You should begin entry-level facilitation. You should have an intro to structural analysis, story of self. And you should begin to cultivate connections with other members in your base, to Fahad's point. So if you scroll down, Angie, you'll just see that what this is it's our attempt to become more systematic, and it's not there yet. We're still working on it. The cohort's pushing me on figuring it out. I'm pushing them on getting more answers. But in each year, we're trying to develop and build on a set of skills. So to your point, Ron, what does human development look like in practice? This tool comes from the 8 organizations in Praxis for Powers, years in on-the-ground organizing, and Angie, you can stop sharing now. Years in on-the-ground organizing, trying to codify what have been across 8 organizations with different organizational forms, different locations, what have been the best practices for actually developing people into strong organizers who can organize in their communities. Okay, great resource, Fahad, on making grounded assessments. And we have time for one more question, and I'd love, Fahad, if you could just quickly speak to Mandeep's question, which is like, how do we think about sustainability with not just staff members, but base building with members or staff volunteers? Like, how do we avoid this cycle of new members, excitement, burnout, then we have to go get new members? What's one of the ways you've seen in your work in Drum that's really supported this?
Yeah, so one part of it is the more rigorous we are in our actual organizing work, recruitment in particular, and leadership development, the less one of the big reasons that like burnout happens is when we actually don't have enough people. And so we overly rely on the same set of people over and over and over again, expecting them to take up everything that's needed. And that's one of the fastest ways that like a lot of organizations burn out members, which is why this, we're like, if we're rigorous in our own organizing, we have lots of people coming in, lots of people being developed, you get to like sort of like share and like spread out the work. And so it doesn't fall overly on like one person. On like in like a small set of like members. And then the flip of that is also like sometimes we get members that just come in on fire, like they're ready to like throw down. And it is, from our perspective, the responsibility of organizers and well-developed leaders to be able to guide folks to be like, hey, I know you're really excited, but like, why don't you watch this thing happen? Or that's a good opportunity for you to take up, but like for this one, I think you should sit this out and like let somebody else. So part of it is also occasionally like people themselves are like really, really fired up. And so we want to be able to slow things down. And then lastly is, I made a reference to this in sort of like both the two categories of like personal practice and social emotional skills. And then in the slides that were just shared, like, some of that is reflected in there as well. Part of it is we also just need to get better about being able to assess our own conditions. How am I doing? Why am I frustrated? Why am I tired? What are the things that I need to tend to that prevents me from feeling this way? What are the things that will make me feel more rejuvenated, more resilient, more joyful? And both kind of like the dominant hegemonic capitalist system encourages us to either like completely suppress our emotions or just like indulge in them in like really ungrounded and healthy ways. And our movements have largely copied those same dynamics of like repress your emotions or ignore them, push them to the side, or alternatively just like be completely in your feelings in a way that you just become like a puddle of feelings. And neither one of those is healthy. We actually, in the this framework of like experimentation and like movement scientists, like we also have to be attempting to have like that sort of orientation with our own human capacities, with our own human condition, our emotions, our health, our well-being, our resilience. We can actually start to move towards being scientific about it. What makes me feel like recharged? What really drains my energy? Based on learning that, like, what are some of the shifts that I need to make? It doesn't mean that like, like I'll only end up doing work that like makes me happy and like rejuvenates me. Like some of the work we need to do is just, it's going to be shit. Like we're dealing with like a fucked up system and like, it's going to require us to do certain things, but we need to be able to have the awareness and the skillfulness to be able to like identify it and figure out what helps me respond to it, deal with it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Fahad. And if we can just show some love in the chat and in emoji reactions for both Fahad and Vidi for the incredible wisdom they shared and the experimental journey they're on to try and build the sort of movement we need to build the power to win. I want to ask you, Monica, like we've talked a lot about the field. Just want to ask, like, what are your hopes for philanthropic leaders on this call and beyond on how they can support power building?
Yeah, thanks, Joan. And again, like, thank you to Kalia, Phoebe, Vidi, Fahad. Like, they've been such brilliant partners in this work. And we could have, it was a strategic decision for us, not just to make this a session that was just for organizers or just for funders, right? Part of the beauty and what we think can happen and make more things possible is when funders are in space with organizers and more clearly hearing and understanding what it means to build power. And, like I've been in the philanthropic game long enough to know that we certainly like to like pick up on trendy words and then incorporate them in our strategies in ways that make us sound aligned, or we really love models, right? And I think what we offer at FCYO is to push against that grain, is to not just say power building, but deeply understand what that means and what it means and looks like to resource that. So much emphasis gets put on passing, moving campaigns or policy wins without the understanding of what Fahad just named, the emotional capacities it takes to develop leaders to actually be organizers and bring in more members and do that base building work. What it actually takes to politically develop somebody so that they can have the skills to assess the moment and power map and build those campaigns. And back to us needing to do that at scale. And so, we hope for our partners in philanthropy that the Power to Win is an opportunity to more deeply engage with folks on the ground around the work that they're doing to leadership development, to organize for power, to assess and evaluate, and to encourage philanthropic partners to also, deeply assess, do they have a structural analysis? Are their resources aligned with the vision that they espouse? If they're using power building, what does that really look like with their resourcing strategies? And so, while Power to Win is much more of an organizer-facing document, we're going to be in the process of developing a philanthropic-facing document called Resourcing to Win this year. It'll come out next year, and it'll be the companion to this, and hopefully a tool for philanthropic leaders who really are. We know there are good folks out there. Many of them are here on this webinar. They showed up, our board, and so how do we bring more folks from philanthropy into this conversation? Because resources are never going to align with our organizing strategy unless folks understand our organizing strategy, right? And unless philanthropy is willing to take more risks in how they resource the vulnerability that Viri talked about, the failure that Kalia talked about, the like trying new things that talked about. So there's a lot of opportunity out there, but folks have to just take that leap, and FCYO is here to partner and encourage folks along the way. And I think with that, I don't know if we can get Raphael or back to you. I know we're gearing to close, so.
We're gearing to close. This is the time. Raphael's in Philadelphia. This is where Boys to Men End of the Road would start playing if we bought the
Hey, yo.
Raphael's going to kick us off on that close.
Yo. Yeah, so as June said at the beginning of this session is simply a sampler, and I know that like folks have deeper questions, especially practical questions. And we're going to dig into those things over the next 3 following webinars. And so I just want to drill down to like the reason why we're having these additional webinars is because we're not really interested in this framework just becoming, again, just like the new cool thing that doesn't really actually change anything in the material world. We want people to really understand where it comes from, why we're doing it, and what it can lead to, so that we can go out and practice what's contained in those words, which is a result of like thousands of hours of like social practice from people all over the country. We really want folks to like understand that like this thing is meant to be implemented and meant to like affect change in the world. So that's why we're doing these 3 additional sessions. And the next session is on June 15th, the same time. And it's really going to give you all kind of a behind the scenes look at all the things that led up to the creation of the Power to Win framework. So all the years of practice and assessment making that like led to folks realizing we needed something else. And we're going to have some like great speakers and folks kind of talk about what that all looked like. So you have a better sense of the why. And then we're going to talk about the how in session 3, right? Which is exploring the interplay between the Power to Win framework and the key programming offerings that FCYO currently has, which are the Gen Power Labs and YoCare, right? And we're going to be digging into like how we conduct, strategic political education, like what does it mean to actually be in principal struggle with folks when it comes to actually pushing people to shift their work, and also just the importance of like the critical nature of experimentation and assessment. And then finally, the last session is going to be about the what. What are we trying to do? We're trying to build more power. So that's going to be a session that we're going to invite everybody to kind of come with their best ideas, given what they've learned over the previous 3 sessions. And let's really talk about what we need to build out in terms of a broader movement to actually win the world that we want. So again, I'm excited about this being released today, and just like the upcoming sessions. Understand that they build on themselves, so you don't want to miss them. If you do, we're going to record them and figure that out. But I encourage everybody to keep attending. They're on the 3rd Thursday of every month up until August, and we look forward to having them. And I'll pass it to Helena.
All right, so hi everybody, I'm Helena and I am the Associate Director here at FCYO. So I'm excited to talk about an upcoming experience for funders. So we're super excited to be in partnership with Funders for Justice to offer a 2-day funders learning experience that connects philanthropic, I still need to say that word properly, leaders directly with on-the-ground organizers based in Atlanta and nationally. So we're coming together at the intersections of the impacts of climate, gentrification, and policing in the South. This is taking place in Atlanta on June 26th and 27th. And I believe that Tachi has just put the link in the chat for registration. And again, this is a learning opportunity for funders. So a little bit of a preview is that Sunday the 25th will be the travel day. And then Monday, the 26th, we have an all-day site visit and discussions planned with Atlanta organizers of Stop Cop City. And then a welcome dinner for funders and FCYO's youth organizing for climate action and racial equity YoCare program field partners. And the dinner will include a panel focused on organizing in the South. And then on Tuesday, we'll have a morning debrief and strategy session. So continuing the funder learning with more conversations, specifically focused on environmental justice and intergenerational organizing. And afternoon session led by Sustainable Georgia Futures that includes a community history education session on gentrification and a local guided walk, as well as a vegetarian food truck lunch. And then a Youth Power Pledge happy hour. So join us for these 2 very packed days of funder activities, and we're excited to see you. And if you have any questions about that, you can reach out to either Tachi or myself.
Thank you, Helena. And I just want to give a quick reminder for folks. If you have any questions about FCYO's capacity building program, please reach out to me, Christopher June, at christopher@fcyo.org. And if you're in philanthropy and want to learn more about FCYO's work and how you can support that work, please reach out to our donor engagement manager, or DEM, Tachi, at Tatiana@fcyo.org. And I believe Tachi just dropped those emails right in the chat. So just copy and paste them from there. Great. And so we're moving towards the very last few minutes of our close. Before we do, I wanted to just share a quick video from the convening that folks referenced, Kalia and Phoebe, because it's one of the things that helps inspire me and helps me think about hope. So Angie, if you could just pull up that video real quick. This was for us a moment where, and this is another one of these moments, where we don't want the framework to just be a thing that exists on our website. We want it to be a living, breathing thing that organizations are testing. And in this moment, we've passed the literal torch to 26 of the organizations who are in our cohorts. So if you could run the clip, Angie.
Who's building power? We're building power! What kind of power? The power to win!
That's a lot of movement scientists. So we're going to do one more poll. You're going to be checking in on the questions. But I'll say that's 50 some odd folks. We've got another whole batch of folks, 50 folks in OWL, another batch in YoCare, another batch applying for the next OWLs in YoCare. We got a lot of folks willing to take on the work of trying to build the power to win. And that's one of the things that grounds me as we move forward. Angie, if you could launch this next poll, just how are you feeling as we leave this call?
June, as folks take the poll, we would be remiss to not shout out Eric Braxton, who I know is on this session. Eric, who was at FCYO for many, many years and just barely transitioned out and was an integral part of building all of this work and writing The Power to Win. So Eric, we love you and we're so glad you're here and watching the journey along with us still. So shout outs to Eric.
Yeah, shout out to Eric Braxton, who did a lot of the work this is built on. Eric and Monica as co-EDs. And Eric, you'll see on the back of the framework when you download it, as one of the people, who wrote a shit ton of this framework. And we'll joke about the many different versions. Eric, Monica, and I batted back and forth before we landed on this one. And with that, I'm going to pass it to you, Monica, for just the final word.
No, thank you all for coming. Toast to the power to win. encourage folks to raise your glass, put a silly hat on, shout out things in the chat. And we'll be with you on this journey, and feel free to outreach to us at any time. We're here as a resource and as a partner in this work. So thank y'all for coming.
Let's do this.